Welcome back to the Rochester Open 2022 Round 4 recap. In this round, I am playing National Master Ashton Jin. We are both tied for first place with 2.5 points out of 3, and I get the white pieces in this game. I'm starting out d4, knight f6. Here I play knight to f3, a little bit different than what you saw me play in round number 2. The reason I played knight to f3 is I wasn't sure if Ashton would have something prepared for kind of my mainline Catalan with d4 and c4. I didn't want to walk into any prep. I decided to play knight to f3 with an idea of going into a delayed Catalan. So if he goes with e6, d5, I'm going to play g3, bishop g2, and then pawn to c4. So he plays d5 here. Now, at this point, probably the strongest move is to play c4 right away. I opted for g3, and black can maybe take advantage of this move by playing bishop to f5, getting the bishop outside of the pawn chain. But we're talking about very small differences here, and it's definitely fine to just play e6, which is what Ashton did in the game. And now we're kind of heading towards a typical Catalan, bishop g2, and I get surprised with pawn to b5. I should mention the Catalan course and all of our courses are currently on sale for 35% off. Link in the description. During these 5 rounds of recaps, you can use the coupon code OPEN, OPEN, and you can preview all the courses for free before deciding to purchase anything. So check that out. We have this move on the board, b5. The reason this move works is because the bishop on f1 vacated this diagonal pointing at b5, and it prevents my c4 break. So Ashton is taking advantage of the fact that I'm delaying c4 by playing b5. And I've seen this before, but it's been a while since I've looked at it because more recently I've been playing c4 on move 2. I knew the idea was to play a4 and then c4. So here I go a4. And right here, I was about 90% sure the move was pawn to c4. And I'm staring at this move during the game and trying to think, can I get away with c4 here? I was definitely second guessing myself. And the reason I didn't want to play c4 is I wasn't sure what happened after d takes c4 because I can't immediately win this pawn back. And I was thinking maybe knight b to d2, but then there's ways to guard this pawn, like for example, bishop to d5. And it was just a little bit fuzzy in my mind, but this is definitely the way to play it. Pawn to c4. That's the best way to play for an advantage with the white pieces here. You will win the pawn back. Instead, I played knight b to d2 with the idea of playing c4. c5, c4, and here we have this double pawn tension, c5 and d5 versus c4 and d4. I think this position is very close to equal. Now, Ashton plays c takes d4, and the computer says this is a small mistake. The top move is b takes c3, b takes c3, and then knight to d7. So it's almost like a French defense structure for black, and this pawn on c5 is very solid, defended by both knight and bishop. This bishop on g2 runs into a pawn chain. I think this is pretty close to equal. Engine's saying about 0.2. So b takes c3 was the strongest. C takes d was played, and I played knight takes d4. And now the issue for black is this b7 bishop and the fact that the king is on e8. So when we look at the imbalances, king safety, I have an advantage here because my king is already sitting safely on g1. Black king takes 2 moves to get castled. Also, this b7 bishop is loose, so there's no d takes c because I capture. So now knight to c6 was played. I take the knight, renewing this pin on the d pawn, right? The c6 bishop is loose. Now I play knight to b3. And here what I'm starting to think is maybe I can pick up this b4 pawn. I want to play pawn to c5, pawn to a5, and see if I can win that pawn outright. I'm also thinking, this could be a good move anyways because the bishop on c1 needs to get out. Maybe to g5, maybe to e3. So this knight on d2 has to move somewhere. And I didn't want to block the bishop on g2 using one of these 2 squares, and I didn't want to bring him back to b1. So this just felt like a useful move with this potential idea of putting pawns on dark squares. Bishop e7, pawn to a5. This is my strategy starting to unfold. I'm looking to play c5 and win the b pawn. The other thing I'm looking to do is annoy this bishop on c6. If the bishop comes back here later, for example, I could play pawn to a6, attacking it in combination with knight to d4, and I'm kind of attacking all the good squares for that bishop. So here Ashton played pawn to a6, and I developed this guy, castles, bishop to b6. This is where I'm starting to make this plan with the blockade on the dark squares. Bishop to b6 attacks the queen, and I'm looking to play c5 next and try to win a pawn. Queen d7, pawn to c5. And at this point, I was feeling pretty confident. I felt like I could scoop up the b pawn and probably had an advantage here. Stockfish is saying around 0.7 advantage for white. Rook a to c8, knight to d4, attacking the bishop. And the top move there is pawn to e5, but bishop to a8 is also pretty good. Just tucking that bishop away safely. Now I play rook to c1. So this pawn was double attacked, both bishop and rook, and I bring a second defender on the pawn. Pawn to e5, knight to f3. So I still felt like during the game that I had a slight advantage here, but I do need to be careful because if I lose this pawn on c5, black does have the big center, pawns on d5 and e5, and it could end up that I'm worse in this position. Queen to e6, queen d2, trying to scoop up the pawn. Knight back to d7, and here I take. And Ashton played this next move immediately, rook to c6. And I was thinking, oh no, what did I miss? Just the psychology of seeing an instant move like that. And in terms of the clocks, I had about 20 minutes left. Ashton had 19 minutes left. So we're on move 20, about 20 minutes left each. And we're getting the 30-second increment per move. We started at 60 minutes. So now what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, can I secure everything on the queen side? Can I make sure I'm not losing this c-pawn back? And looking at the top stockfish moves, it likes moves like pawn to h4, knight to e1, knight to d2, just kind of opening up this bishop. I played knight to d2, so pretty good move. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to counterattack the d-pawn, thinking if black wants to win the c-pawn, maybe I can create a nice threat on the d-pawn, win that back in return. Rook to b8 played, that's the top move. Queen to b3, and this was a miscalculation on my part. I was thinking I could take this pawn, but after knight takes c5, it doesn't work. If I go bishop takes d5, there's knight takes b3, and I'm losing material here. And if I play queen takes d5 in this position, I didn't initially spot this during the game, but there's this nice tactic, rook takes b6. The rook defends the queen, and the bishop on a8 attacks my queen. So I don't have time to take this because my queen gets captured, and if I take the queen, the rook takes back and black is up a piece. So that's what I had miscalculated, and I made a similar miscalculation in the Chicago Open, the game that I lost right at the very end where my queen was trying to defend two things at the same time. Same type of tactic. So here I had to bail out and play queen to a2, trying to keep my pressure on this d5 pawn. That's how I'm getting my counterplay. Rook back to c8. Now pawn to e4. I'm playing very aggressively, but my idea is I would like queen takes e6 and hope that black has to either retreat the knight or take with the pawn, doubling up the pawns. d4 played. I take, and I thought for sure Ashton would play knight takes e6 here. And at this point, I was going to go bishop to a7, attacking this rook, which guards this rook. And if rook takes c1, rook takes c1 back, I'm actually controlling the c file now. So even if black goes for this extra pawn, I can get very aggressive and play it for this back rank stuff. And things are getting pretty sloppy, but black has to be careful with my rook sitting on the back rank like this. Like let's say rook takes here, bishop f1. I got the bishop pair, the king's going to hide on g2. Engine's saying this is about equal, but this is the type of thing that I was hoping to play for, getting a lot of counterplay for the one pawn. So Ashton here played f takes e6, and now I play bishop to h3, trying to annoy black, attack this pawn, which is only defended by the knight, and if the knight gets captured, I might scoop up this pawn with check. Keep in mind the material's equal, so being able to win one pawn will matter. At this point, I was thinking if king f7, my plan was to play f4 and try to open up this rook down the f-file. But instead, king to h8 was played, and this was a key moment in the game. For me to play for the win here, I need to find f3 and just play solid. This pawn is now defended by the pawn on f3, and that shuts out the a8 bishop. There's no way for black to break this structure. This structure is going to be like this for a long time. The bishop on a8 is boxed out. This is definitely the way to play for the win. I missed this idea though. I was still kind of keeping in my mind that I need to play very aggressive and play actively. And I played bishop takes c5, and then I grabbed this pawn. So now I'm up one pawn, but according to the computer, we're about equal. And the issue here is this bishop on a8 is coming into the game soon. If that bishop takes this pawn, I'm in big trouble because black has the bishop pair and a wide open board, already has the passed d pawn. So g6 was played. I think this move makes a lot of sense because black needs to watch out for back rank tactics. g6 just feels logical. So I swap a set of rooks, play rook c1, trying to get this rook very active. Bishop to b4, knight to f3. This is a mistake. I'm allowing these bishops to get a ton of play. So really what I should do in this position is play something like knight to c4. Knight guards the pawn. If bishop takes, go for this right away. Wait a little bit on this rook because I kind of encouraged this bishop to go to a good square, and my rook didn't necessarily want to be on c1 that quickly. There's a lot of tactics here, and at this point in the game, we're at move 29. Each side had about 6 minutes on the clock, playing off the 30-second increment. So bishop b4. This best move here is rook to d1, defending the knight. Knight f3, bishop takes, and now I'm under attack. I go knight takes e5. It looks like rook to e8 could try to win material, but there's actually rook to c8. And I was happy with this transition because after d3, bishop takes a6, d2, bishop e2, bishop c2, pawn a6. This is actually, I felt like I might be winning this even. It was hard to calculate, but I was okay with the rook trade. I kept looking for that rook trade, thinking if I can get to a rook trade position and stop the d pawn or sacrifice for it and have a lot of pawns in return, then I'm probably doing okay. So d3 was played, rook c7, and here I'm definitely going for counterplay. Pawn to d2. This pawn is really scary. It's about to become a queen. I play bishop to g4. Huge blunder according to Stockfish. My idea was the bishop guards d1, and this bishop cannot help the pawn by going to f3 or by going to c2 because my rook can take it. This was a massive blunder. Stockfish is saying the only move to keep it even close, somewhat close, still -1, knight f7 check, knight g5 check, and if this king runs, repeat, knight f7 check. So the king actually, the best move is to go back. King h5, bishop to b3. This is just kind of craziness. And if king f6, knight takes e4 check, king takes e6, sack the knight. Wow, rook c6, take this pawn. So if it's rook and bishop against rook, it's technically supposed to be a draw, but this endgame is just getting crazy, and black is running out of pawns here, but they are up the bishop. I don't know if that's something that would really cross my mind, even with a lot of time on the clock. I think I was just so focused on, you got to stop that pawn. At this point, I didn't want to sacrifice for it while keeping rooks on the board. Okay, so bishop g4, bishop d5. This was a blunder back. Bishop takes a5 was the best move, attacking my rook. And let's say I try to go behind the pawn. This bishop still guards this pawn, and black can simply play rook takes b2. And here, I'm not quite getting enough counterplay with the knight check. Let's say knight here, king there. What's the follow-up? Knight h6 check, king f8. I'm starting to run out of checks. I could go rook here. I could go bishop check, king here. That pawn's about to turn into a queen. If I go bishop back, I'm getting mated on the back rank because this gets cut off. So bishop takes a5, a very good move here. There's not really any good square for this rook to go to. If rook to c4, for example, there's bishop to f5, attacking the defender of the d1 square. And if I try to bring the bishop back to d1, now there's rook takes b2. And again, these pieces are not causing any issue for the black king. And this black pawn is still very close to queening, and there's now a passed A pawn with the bishop pair. Stockfish is saying -8 point advantage for black because rook to B1 is coming. So let's say king F1, rook to B1, king here, bishop to H3 can be played, or bishop to E6. Bishop to H3 is kind of nice, threatening bishop to F1 check. And this guy is not defended. So you can just see like almost every line, white is running into massive problems here. Okay, bishop D5 was played though. And I put the bishop safely back on D1. And now the position is close to equal again. It's a -0.6 according to the engine. Rook E8, and I have to play F4. I have to guard the knight, and I can't allow this rook to come in. Even a move like knight to D3, rook here could still be played because after takes, pawn takes, making a queen. All right, bishop takes A5, rook to D7. And here I realize I need to keep the rook behind this pawn. It's very important. And then maybe I can get that knight to attack the pawn next. Bishop E6, rook D6, keeping the rook on the file. My rook gets attacked, and here I get a little bit greedy. I wasn't sure where to put the rook, and the best move is to actually leave the file and play rook to C6. And I have to watch out for bishop to C5 check, so I can't put the rook on this diagonal. This was a mistake. This was a blunder. Rook to C8 is the top move. Ashton finds it, and here I play rook to C6. This is complicated. The best move is rook takes rook. I take back, bishop to C5 check. This king cannot step to one of these squares because there's a fork dropping the knight. And if the king goes this way, there's a check here. And after king G2, winning the knight again. We both missed this tactical sequence. And there's no bishop to E2 here because black can make a queen. So this idea of the rook trade, I think, is a nice one if I'm not losing the knight. But we both just missed that, hey, it's losing the knight. So rook to A8 was played. King to F2. So now I'm trying to bring my king to E2 to defend the bishop. Bishop D5, rook comes down. And I got very fortunate here. I found this resource. And it's something that I hadn't been looking at too closely, let's say 5 moves prior to this. But when I got to this position, putting the king on F2, here I was definitely thinking about it because I knew rook to A1 was kind of the critical try, trying to get this bishop off the D1 square. And I had this idea, if I can somehow get rook here, rook check, I could get some repetition going. So bishop D5, check, check. Here a draw was agreed, and I'll show you why. If this king tries to run out, there's knight to G4 check. The king comes here, rook takes H7 mate. If the king tries to run out this way, knight to G4 check again. If the king goes to E6, the knight can go to E3, defending this bishop. White's got this position on lockdown, and keep in mind, white is still up 1 pawn. So this is technically a draw still, according to Stockfish, but white's up a pawn, and that's something that you have to consider as black. So really, there wasn't anything better than to go for the repetition. King going back, 8th rank, 7th rank, keep repeating. So this was a really wild game, kind of a roller coaster game. You know, I had a nice position early on, missed some chances to press harder, made a couple inaccurate moves, and then there were a couple blunders back and forth in the time pressure. Ashton had a chance to put me away a couple times there. He did say after the game he thought I played a really nice defensive game, which was nice of him to say, but I think really I got outplayed in this game, and it was Ashton's to win a couple times at the end, and I was really never winning earlier on. It was more like around that +1 advantage, or maybe I could have just pressed a little harder to try to increase that advantage. But I don't think I was ever winning. Ashton definitely had a couple wins in the end game. So this was a fun game. This was a Catalan with a different move order. Make sure to check out the link in the description for the Chess Goals courses. There's 35% off through round 5 of these recaps. Coupon code OPEN, OPEN, and you can try out the courses for free. There's free previews, all the courses, including the Catalan course. Thanks for watching, and I will see you for round number 5 tomorrow.